children are our top priority at TBI. They are the most vulnerable population that we have. They're our most precious things in our world. TBI has always placed an emphasis on missing children.
Investigators have executed numerous search warrants, collecting all potential evidence. We've spoken with anyone and everyone associated with the Wells family. We've used a plane, helicopters, divers, canines, and every resource available to us during search efforts. Despite the countless hours of tireless work, the circumstances surrounding her disappearance remain unclear. At this time, there is no evidence that she was abducted. However, all avenues continue to be explored, including foul play and the very real possibility that she wandered off and became lost in the mountainous and rough terrain surrounding her home.
The photo meant to prove Summer Wells was alive may actually prove the opposite. In the so-called milk jug picture, her tiny body is slumped like a rag doll, her skin disturbingly pale, her seatbelt twisted out of place. Details that scream something was already terribly wrong. Add to this the chilling report of a scream on that very afternoon, a tote that mysteriously vanished from the family truck, and a $98,000 check that appeared the moment Summer disappeared. These aren't coincidences. They are red flags, pointing to a cover-up far darker than the idea she simply wandered off. This is evidence that could rip apart the official story, and if investigated fully, could flip the entire case upside down. When the Wells family released what they called the last photo of 5-year-old Summer, it was meant to silence suspicion. The image showed her in the back seat of the truck, leaning against milk jugs, as if dozing after a long day. It was presented as proof she had returned from the swimming hole alive. Yet instead of clearing doubts, this single photograph became the most haunting piece of evidence in the case. To the eyes of investigators, journalists, and even ordinary viewers, it does not look like a child at rest. It looks like a staged tableau, a body propped up for the camera, a picture that accuses rather than absolves. What makes this photograph so disturbing is the posture. Children fall asleep in cars all the time, but they never look this way. Summer is not curled into her seat or stretched in a natural slouch. Her body has collapsed, her head tilted awkwardly, her arm hanging loose, as if the muscles have given up completely. The comparison that many have made, and it is impossible to ignore once seen, is that of a rag doll, limp, hollow, emptied of life. A sleeping child maintains some tension. Even in deep rest, the body resists total collapse. Here, it seems as though only the surrounding objects prevent her from toppling entirely. The seatbelt tells its own story. It is not secured across her chest the way every parent instinctively ensures. Instead, the strap is misplaced, trailing behind her. This detail matters because a seatbelt is one of the most automatic acts of care. Parents don't forget how to buckle a child. They don't ignore a belt meant to protect in case of sudden stops or crashes. Unless, of course, protection is already meaningless. Unless what matters more in that moment is appearance. The incorrect seatbelt positioning suggests not neglect, but staging, the effort to make it look like a child is in her seat, when in truth the belt is irrelevant to her condition. Then there are the milk jugs themselves, the strange and unsettling backdrop. Summer is not leaning against the car seat or resting against a sibling. She is slumped into hard plastic containers, cold from refrigeration, stacked beside her. No parent would let a child nap against freezing groceries. They would shift her, cover her, cushion her. Yet here she is, positioned between cartons and boxes, as though those inanimate objects were necessary to keep her upright. This is not comfort. It is scaffolding. It looks like someone needed to arrange her body for a photograph. Perhaps the most chilling clue is not visual at all, but audio. On the video associated with this moment, Candace's voice can be heard, remarking, "Has she got her arm up?" To hear a mother speak these words about her child is jarring. It does not sound like affection, like concern for comfort. It sounds clinical, detached, almost rehearsed, as though she is checking a pose, not checking on her daughter's well-being. The sentence has the eerie resonance of someone ensuring a prop looks right on camera. If Candace herself noticed the unnatural position of her daughter's body, then this short, offhand line may be one of the most damning utterances in the case. The lighting in the photograph deepens the unease. It was June in Tennessee, the heat of summer, the season when skin glows warm from sun and play. A child who had spent the day outside, swimming, should radiate that vitality. But Summer's face in the image is pale, her complexion waxy, her vibrancy gone. Shadows and reflections explain some of the coloration, but not the whole. Even in the brightest patches, her skin looks drained, lacking the blush of circulation. Forensic observers have noted that this pallor could indicate unconsciousness or worse. It is the kind of tone more consistent with death than life, raising the possibility that the moment the shutter clicked, the little girl was already beyond saving. Some viewers who scrutinize the image claim to see an even darker detail, a faint, reddish spot beneath the seatbelt at her stomach. To some, it is nothing but a shadow. To others, it looks like blood. If that interpretation is correct, the implications are devastating. Blood means injury. Injury means violence or accident. And a photo showing an injured child slumped lifelessly would obliterate the official claim that she simply vanished into thin air. It would mean the narrative of her wandering away into the woods was never possible, because she was already harmed before she left that truck. The most troubling question, then, is not just what the picture shows, but why it was released. If Summer was already gone, why not hide this image forever? Why risk letting outsiders see what might be a corpse propped against groceries? The answer may lie in intent. To Candace, recording her daughter in the truck may have seemed like insurance, a ready-made alibi to prove that Summer came home alive from the swimming hole. In her mind, the picture could serve as evidence of innocence. But cover-ups are rarely clean. The very details overlooked in the rush to stage the scene, the seatbelt, the milk jugs, the limp arm, the pallor, are the cracks through which the truth now leaks. The so-called last photo of Summer Wells was supposed to silence doubts. Instead, it created them. It was supposed to protect her parents from suspicion. Instead, it may implicate them. It was meant to show life, but every inch of it whispers death. The family thought the camera would shield them. Instead, the lens became a silent witness, capturing not innocence, but accusation. This photograph is not harmless. It is not casual. It is, in the eyes of many, the single most incriminating piece of evidence in the case. The question is no longer whether Summer looked strange in that truck. The question is what her body in that image truly tells us about her condition, her fate, and the moment everything went wrong. To answer that, we must leave the realm of suspicion and step into science. The signs of posture, pallor, and possible blood are not just eerie impressions, they are medical indicators. Was this child truly asleep? Or was she already slipping into death, her body displaying the earliest marks of lividity, of drowning, of suffocation? The photograph alone is chilling, but the forensic implications hidden within it are even more damning. And that is where the investigation must go next. When the milk jug picture is magnified, what emerges is not the softness of a child asleep, but the stillness of a body that may already have crossed into death. Small details, tone, posture, color, expose a truth that contradicts the claim of innocence. They are not quirks of lighting or awkward positioning. They are clinical signs. The first, and most obvious, is Summer's complexion. This was June in Tennessee, a hot day following hours of outdoor activity. A 5-year-old fresh from swimming should be warm and rosy. Instead, her face is drained, her skin flat and chalky. Even with light streaming across the car and reflecting off the white jugs, she appears colorless, waxen. Such pallor is rarely seen in healthy children. It often indicates shock, respiratory distress, or the end of circulation. Then there is her right hand. Observers noticed an unnatural puffiness, with fingers tinted deeper than the rest of her body. In forensic medicine, this swelling and discoloration can indicate livor mortis, blood settling by gravity once the heart has stopped. Lividity begins within 30 minutes. Its presence in a child supposedly alive in that photograph would mean one thing: the timeline presented to the public cannot be true. Her posture reinforces that suspicion. Sleeping children still resist gravity. Their heads loll, but their bodies shift, they stir, they curl instinctively. Summer shows none of that. She is slumped, folded forward, her muscles offering no resistance. It is not the weight of sleep, but the collapse of tone. Her body remains upright only because the groceries beside her hold it in place. The scene does not suggest comfort, it suggests staging. And looming over all of this is what happened earlier that day. Hunter reported pulling Summer out of the water after she stayed submerged too long. She coughed, sputtered, and recovered, but such episodes carry a hidden danger: secondary drowning. Fluid in the lungs can irritate tissue and hours later, trigger respiratory failure. One of the earliest signs is sudden fatigue, a child who insists they are only tired, then slips into unconsciousness. Link that medical reality with the pale skin, the limp posture, and the odd swelling of her hand, and the conclusion becomes far more than speculation. Science does not bend to narrative. Pallor during a hot June afternoon is abnormal. Lividity does not appear in the living. A child slumped like a doll is not resting naturally. Put together, these features suggest that by the time the shutter clicked, Summer Wells was not simply sleeping. She may have been dying or already gone. If this is true, then the official account, that she returned home, planted flowers, and wandered off, collapses entirely. The critical scene was not the yard or the woods, but the truck. And if her body already bore these signs during that ride, then the photograph is not proof of life. It is forensic evidence of death, captured and unknowingly shared. The implications are staggering. It means the crime did not begin with a disappearance. It began in that vehicle. And to understand what may have happened next, we must now turn to what followed inside that truck: the missing tote, the reported scream, and the desperate moves to conceal what the camera had already revealed. During her interviews, Candace Bly made a slip that still echoes through the case. She casually mentioned a tote in the back of the truck, one of those plastic storage containers families use to haul groceries, laundry, or clutter. It should have been an ordinary detail, unremarkable. Yet what makes this tote extraordinary is that soon after Candace referenced it, it vanished from the story. Later accounts avoided it, as if it had never existed. For investigators and the public alike, that disappearance is not trivial. It may point to a missing piece of physical evidence, one that could explain how Summer's body was moved, and why no one has ever found her. The first problem is Candace's contradictory statements. In her early version, she openly acknowledged that a tote was in the truck on the day Summer vanished. She even pointed to it in an interview, describing its position among groceries and jugs. But in later conversations, the tote no longer existed. It was omitted or brushed aside, as if it were irrelevant. Anyone familiar with criminal investigations knows what such inconsistency means. Either memory is failing, or the speaker has realized that what she revealed initially may incriminate her. People rarely erase details that truly don't matter. They erase the ones that matter too much. Viewers who dissected those interviews latched onto this missing tote immediately. To many, it seemed obvious. If Summer died in the car, whether from heat, suffocation, or secondary drowning, the family would have needed a way to conceal her body quickly. A tote, large enough to contain a 5-year-old, would have been the most convenient option. In one swoop, groceries and child could be hauled inside without neighbors noticing. And if anyone asked later, the tote was just gone. The very ordinariness of a plastic container makes it the perfect disguise. The speculation is grim, but not unfounded. True crime is littered with cases where killers used ordinary household items to conceal victims: duffel bags, coolers, bins. The Wells case may be no different. What separates conjecture from evidence is the tote's timeline. Candace spoke of it once, then it disappeared not just from the truck, but from the official record. Why was it never logged by investigators? Why was it not seized, tested, or even publicly addressed? If a container large enough to hold a child existed in the vehicle on the day of the disappearance, standard police protocol would demand it be treated as evidence. That it wasn't is either gross negligence or deliberate omission. Here is where suspicion deepens. According to several online sleuths who studied Candace's interviews frame by frame, her body language shifted when the tote came up. She glanced away, fumbled her words, as though realizing she had said too much. Later, when pressed, she denied its significance altogether. For those watching, the pattern was unmistakable, an accidental admission followed by damage control. In that space between the two versions, the possibility of concealment takes root. The audience's imagination quickly filled the void. If the tote was used, where did it go afterward? Some believe it never left the property, that it was hidden in the clutter of sheds, discarded with trash, or buried. Others think it may have been destroyed or burned, the plastic melted to erase forensic traces. Still others argue that it might have been washed, scrubbed until no residue remained. But the most important question remains unanswered. Why did law enforcement not demand to see it immediately? That leads us to the legal angle. In high-profile cases, anything even remotely linked to a missing child is supposed to be secured. Vehicles are impounded. Items inside them are cataloged. Containers, fabrics, fluids, all are tested for DNA, blood, or decomposition. A tote described by the child's mother, present in the vehicle during the crucial window, should have been one of the first items tagged. Yet in public records, there is no mention of such a container being examined. For skeptics, this silence is not accidental. It suggests the investigation may have overlooked or deliberately ignored a potential piece of physical evidence that could unravel the official story. The tote also fits too neatly with the timeline of events. Neighbors reported hearing a scream that afternoon. If Summer died suddenly in the truck, Candace may have panicked. A tote provided both concealment and transport. In one moment, groceries and child could be carried inside. Once behind closed doors, the story could be reshaped. Summer was planting flowers, Summer wandered off, Summer vanished. The tote, once useful, became a liability. Its erasure from later accounts makes sense in that context. What doesn't make sense is why law enforcement never forced the issue. Consider too how the tote overlaps with the milk jug picture. That image shows Summer slumped, pale, propped between groceries. If she died in that position, the next step would have been to move her. Doing so openly risked exposure. But a tote, an everyday container, could carry her without arousing suspicion. In this light, the tote is not just a missing item. It may be the bridge between the photographic evidence of death and the disappearance itself. Without it, the family could never have claimed she wandered off. With it, they had a way to explain her absence. What chills observers most is that such a simple, plastic object could hold the key to the mystery. A tote is not dramatic. It is mundane. Yet its absence, its quiet erasure, screams louder than any alibi. If Summer's remains were ever inside it, the tote would carry microscopic truths, traces of DNA, fluids, fibers, imprints of a child's final moments. Destroying it would be the first priority of anyone desperate to hide evidence. That it was mentioned once and then never again suggests exactly that. It was eliminated. So the tote stands as a ghost in this investigation, invisible yet impossible to forget. It is both an object and a symbol, embodying the possibility of a cover-up. Candace's inconsistent statements created the first crack. Observers widened it with theories of concealment, and law enforcement's silence cemented it as one of the darkest unanswered questions in the Summer Wells case. The missing tote demands one final question. If investigators overlooked or ignored such a basic piece of evidence, what else did they miss? What other items slipped through their hands, hidden in plain sight? Because if the tote truly contained Summer in those crucial hours, then the official narrative is not just incomplete, it is false. And the concealment of a child inside a container is not the story of a girl who wandered into the woods. It is the story of a body moved, a truth buried, and a case that will never be solved until that silence is broken. To follow that silence, we must step back to where the tragedy likely began, not in a truck or a tote, but in the water. The swimming hole was the first setting for Summer's collapse, the place witnesses saw her submerged, coughing, struggling. If the tote suggests how she was concealed, the swimming hole suggests why she needed to be hidden at all. The first cracks in the official story appear not in the house on Ben Hill Road, nor in the truck on the driveway, but at the swimming hole earlier that day. It was here, by a muddy patch of water, that Summer was last undeniably seen alive. And it was here that a witness, Hunter, described a moment that now feels like the spark that set off everything that followed. According to him, Summer went under the water too long. When he pulled her back up, she coughed, choked, and expelled water. Not the harmless splashing of a child at play, but the alarming sputters of someone who had nearly drowned. Hunter's account paints a picture of crisis disguised as play. He said Summer appeared to be in trouble, submerged longer than expected. Anyone who has witnessed a child inhale water knows the terror of those moments, the gasps for breath the water expelled, the sudden weakness that follows. Summer's sputtering wasn't brushed off because it was minor. It was brushed off because the adults with her either didn't recognize or didn't want to acknowledge how serious it was. A 5-year-old doesn't simply cough off a drowning scare. Even if she appears to recover, the body often continues to fight quietly, invisibly. That silence is what makes drowning so deceptive. There is no violent thrashing, no dramatic cry for help. Children slip under an eerie stillness. And what Hunter described fits precisely with what medical literature calls secondary drowning, or delayed drowning. A child inhales water, lungs swell, irritation builds, and hours later, without warning, they collapse. One of the earliest symptoms is profound exhaustion. The child insists they are just tired, lies down, and never wakes again. Summer's collapse into limp stillness in the milk jug photo suddenly makes terrifying sense when viewed through this lens. Another detail compounds suspicion. There is no video showing Summer leaving the swimming hole. Footage exists of her going in, splashing, but not of her climbing out, wrapping in a towel, or walking away. In an age when every moment is captured for social media, that absence feels like a black hole in the timeline. Did no one think to film her exit? Or was the omission deliberate, because what happened in those moments would have contradicted the story later told? For critics, the missing footage is more than coincidence. It is a hole in the record, and into that hole slips the possibility that Summer never truly left the water alive. Consider the photograph of her in the truck, propped beside milk jugs. If Hunter's account is accurate, if Summer inhaled water and was pulled up choking, then the limp, pale figure in the back seat begins to look less like a napping child and more like a body already succumbing to delayed drowning. Her posture, her pallor, her lifeless arm, all consistent with a body shutting down after respiratory failure. The timing fits too well. Dry drowning can take hours, but it can also strike swiftly. If Summer was submerged in the afternoon and photographed shortly after, then the milk jug picture may not be proof of life, but a record of decline. Here lies the most haunting question: did Summer ever truly return home that day? The narrative insists she did, that she was seen planting flowers in the yard, that she vanished from the property. But what if that image of her in the truck is the last time she was seen at all? If the photo was staged immediately after leaving the swimming hole, then the planting flowers story crumbles. It becomes not a memory but a fabrication, constructed to shift suspicion from where it belonged, the water and the car, onto an impossible abduction from the yard. Hunter's words resonate even more in hindsight. He was a teenager then, not an expert, but he recognized something was wrong. His account of pulling Summer from the water, of her coughing and choking, is the raw testimony of a witness who saw a near drowning with his own eyes. Law enforcement may have downplayed it, but the physiology does not lie. The lungs do not forgive water easily. Secondary drowning is rare, but when it occurs, it follows precisely the sequence Hunter described: submersion, rescue, coughing, apparent recovery, sudden collapse. So was Summer's fate sealed not in the woods but in the water? Did the crucial moment occur not in some abductor's hands, but right there in the swimming hole, in front of witnesses who failed to act? The answer may never be certain. But what is certain is this: if she was dying from secondary drowning, then the photograph in the truck captured her already on the edge, and the story of her vanishing from the yard is a cover layered on top of tragedy. The weight of this possibility forces us to reconsider everything. The tote in the truck, the screams neighbors reported, the hurried planting flowers story, all make sense only if Summer was already gone by the time she supposedly wandered off. The swimming hole becomes the origin point, the place where her life began to ebb, where panic began to ripple, where the cover-up was born. The swimming hole holds another kind of silence as well, the silence of missing records. Who else was there? What did they see? Why is there no footage of her leaving? Silence in cases like this is not emptiness. It is erasure. And erasure always serves someone. As we move forward, the focus shifts from the water to the vehicle. Because if Summer's collapse began at the swimming hole, then the truck became the scene where her death was realized. Neighbors spoke of screams that afternoon, piercing and unexplained. Perhaps that was the moment Candace discovered that Summer was no longer breathing. If so, then the sound that split the quiet Tennessee air was not the cry of a child being taken, but the wail of a mother realizing her daughter was already gone. And that takes us to the next stage of this grim timeline. What happened in the truck after they left the water, and why the scream still echoes through every unanswered question in this case. The moment that refuses to fade from local memory is not a sight but a sound, a scream heard by neighbors on the very day Summer disappeared. Accounts differ in detail, but the essence remains the same, a sharp cry, unexpected and chilling, tearing through the quiet of rural Tennessee. It was loud enough to draw notice, disturbing enough to etch itself into recollection. Yet in the official timeline, this scream has no place. Law enforcement rarely mentions it. The family brushes past it. And so it lingers, unexplained, like an echo pointing back to something too dark to acknowledge. For many following the case, the scream marks the instant when the fragile cover collapsed. One popular theory holds that it was Candace who screamed, the moment she discovered her daughter lifeless in the truck. It fits the pattern, a child left slumped against groceries, already pale, already limp, and a mother suddenly realizing the finality of what she had thought was exhaustion. The sound neighbors recall is not the drawn-out cry of a child in distress, but the guttural noise of adult shock, raw and uncontrolled. If true, the scream was not a prelude to abduction, but the recognition of death. The truck, from the beginning, has been at the heart of speculation. Nearly every alternative theory passes through it. If Summer succumbed to secondary drowning, it happened there. If she overheated, trapped in the heat of June, it was in that confined space. If suffocation or deliberate harm occurred, the truck was the stage. Forensics often treats vehicles as mobile crime scenes, and here the evidence fits. It was the one environment where she was last verifiably seen, and the one place that connects all the fragments, the milk jug photo, the missing tote, the scream. A detail that shocks even seasoned observers is Summer's outfit. On a day when temperatures soared, she was dressed in a pink tracksuit, long sleeves, long pants, heavy fabric. This choice makes no sense for a child who had just been swimming. Unless, as many suspect, the outfit was not about comfort but concealment. Long sleeves and pants can cover bruises, scratches, even bloodstains. They can disguise a body that is cooling unnaturally fast. To put a child in such clothing in the middle of summer is illogical, unless logic has shifted from care to concealment. It is striking, too, that the truck is rarely addressed directly by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Public statements emphasize woods, mountains, strangers, anywhere but the vehicle. Dogs were brought to search hillsides, cadaver teams scarred terrain, but far less has been said about forensic analysis inside the truck. This silence is suspicious. If dogs alerted there, if evidence was found, the public has not been told. For critics, the omission feels deliberate, as if investigators are steering attention away from the one place where the most damning evidence might lie. The scream, the truck, the outfit. Together they suggest that the defining moment of this case did not happen in the yard where Summer supposedly planted flowers. It happened inside that vehicle. The neighbors did not hear a child wandering into the woods. They heard the unraveling of a truth too dangerous to admit. And the truck, far from being incidental, emerges as the central stage where Summer's life ended and the desperate improvisation of cover-up began. To pursue the truth further, we must follow the trail of overlooked or deliberately ignored evidence. Because beyond the truck lies a pattern of silence, a fridge examined on television but never explained, dogs that alerted but whose alerts were buried in reports, trail cameras that captured figures whose presence was never accounted for. The scream may have been the moment the truth broke through, but these other fragments reveal how that truth was hidden. When people talk about the Summer Wells case, most focus on the milk jug picture, or the official story that she simply wandered off. But beyond that, There are other pieces of evidence that almost no one talks about anymore. Each of them may seem small on its own, but together they raise very big questions. These are the old fridge in the yard, the alerts from cadaver dogs, and a strange piece of trail cam footage showing more people coming out of the woods than going in. The first detail is the old fridge. It was shown during an appearance on Dr. Phil. When the camera moved across the yard and caught the broken refrigerator, Don Wells' reaction stood out, his eyes fixed on it in a way that viewers described as nervous, even panicked. To most, an old fridge sitting outside is just junk. But in many crime cases, old fridges and freezers have been used to hide bodies. They are large, sealed, and heavy enough that people don't think to check inside or under them. That's why Don's look raised alarm. Was it guilt or just coincidence? And the more important question, did investigators ever search inside or beneath that fridge? If not, that's a serious gap in the investigation. The second clue comes from the cadaver dogs. These dogs are trained to smell what humans cannot, the scent of human decomposition. According to locals, the dogs alerted both around the Wells truck and at several points inside the house. Dogs don't care about rumors. They respond when they smell something real. Yet the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation has never given the public a clear explanation. Where exactly did the dogs alert? What tests were done afterward? If a dog gave a strong reaction in the truck, why wasn't it seized and searched top to bottom? If alerts happened inside the home, why were there no follow-up reports or deeper searches? The silence makes it feel like these alerts were brushed aside, even though they may have been the closest thing to a direct lead. The third piece is the trail cam footage. According to people who claim to have seen it, the footage shows 4 people entering a wooded area, but only 3 coming out. Another version of the story says 4 got into a vehicle, and 1 was dropped off before the rest drove away. No one outside law enforcement knows for certain, and TBI has never confirmed or denied it. But if the footage is real, it could point to someone moving a body or handing Summer off. If it's fake, then showing the public the original file could have cleared up years of suspicion. By saying nothing, investigators left a blank space that was quickly filled with speculation. When you line these 3 things up, the fridge, the dogs, and the trail cam, a disturbing picture forms. They all suggest movement, hiding, and possible disposal, not a child simply walking away into the woods. Each of these could have been checked and either ruled in or ruled out. Was the fridge swabbed or tested? Were the dogs' alerts mapped and followed up with searches? Was the trail cam video ever authenticated? The public has never been told. And that silence is not neutral. Every time a question like this is left unanswered, it opens the door for doubt, suspicion, and mistrust. Maybe the fridge was just junk. Maybe the dogs were mistaken. Maybe the video was fake. But without clear answers, people believe the worst. And in this case, the worst possibility is that key evidence pointing to what really happened to Summer Wells has been hidden, ignored, or quietly explained away. The question then becomes why? Why would investigators avoid these leads? Why would obvious pieces of evidence be left in the shadows? If the truth lies in a fridge, a dog's nose, or a camera in the woods, who benefits from leaving it buried? That takes us to the next part of this case, the possible motive. Because if evidence is being ignored, it's not just about fear or panic anymore. It's about gain. And in the Summer Wells case, gain may have come in the form of money. During a live stream, Candace herself mentioned that Dawn received a large check, nearly $98,000, right around the time Summer vanished. To most families in rural Tennessee, that kind of money is life-changing. But the timing is what makes it so unsettling. Why would such a large sum appear at the exact moment a child disappeared? The first question is, where did the money come from? Some online sleuths and local observers point to Dawn's close friend Tim Mullen. Around that same time, one of Mullen's friends received a liver transplant. It's a bizarre connection, but people quickly link the 2 events. Summer goes missing. Dawn gets a large check. Tim's friend gets a new organ. On its face, it sounds almost like conspiracy fiction. Yet the dates line up close enough that suspicion won't die. Could this money have been connected to something darker? something involving Summer's disappearance. The speculation goes even further. Many believe the $98,000 wasn't just a random payout. They argue it could have been a payoff for silence, cooperation, or even the exchange of Summer herself. It's a horrifying thought, but in cases involving missing children, financial motives are not rare. Whether through life insurance, benefits, hush money, or criminal networks, children have been reduced to bargaining chips before. The idea that Summer may have been turned into value instead of being protected as a child is why this rumor has stuck so hard. From the start, the Wells family struggled financially. Their home was in poor condition, cluttered and neglected. Doan's work as a contractor brought in income, but not enough to lift them out of poverty. CPS was circling, threatening to take the children. Legal fees, addiction, and daily survival created heavy pressure. Against that backdrop, nearly $100,000 arriving suddenly feels less like chance and more like motive. Families in desperate situations sometimes make unthinkable choices. If money was offered, would someone in the Wells circle have accepted it? The check also raises practical questions. Why wasn't it investigated publicly? Did law enforcement ever verify its source? In high-profile cases, sudden large financial transactions are one of the first things examined. Bank records, deposits, withdrawals, they all paint a picture. But the public has never been given answers about this money. Without those answers, people are left to assume the worst. And the worst, in this case, is that Summer Wells was treated not as a daughter but as currency. Consider how audiences have reacted to this rumor. Comments online show a consistent theme. If Dawn got that check right when Summer vanished, it can't be coincidence. One viewer put it bluntly, she didn't just wander off. She was worth money to someone. Another wrote, kids don't vanish for free. There's always a transaction. These reactions may be raw, but they reflect a deep mistrust of both the family and the investigation. Without transparency, suspicion thrives. The possibility of a financial motive also lines up with other elements of the case. Why were stories about Summer's last day so inconsistent? Why did Candace change details? Why did Dawn show such strange behavior on television? If there was money involved, every slip, every nervous look, every cover story could have been about protecting not just themselves, but the payout. It explains the frantic push to prove Summer was alive in the milk jug picture. It explains the quick dismissal of rumors about the tote, the fridge, or the dogs. If Summer was already gone because of a deal, then everything after was damage control. Sadly, there are many real-world examples where children have been harmed or disappeared under financial pressure. Parents who killed for insurance payouts, caregivers who sold children into trafficking to pay debts, guardians who accepted money to hand over custody under false pretenses. It's uncomfortable, but it's real. And the Wells case sits uncomfortably close to these patterns. A sudden check, a missing child, a family drowning in problems. The pieces fit too well to ignore. If true, the $98,000 check represents not just a number on a bank slip but the price of a life. It transforms Summer's case from a story of negligence or accident into something colder, a transaction. It raises the possibility that she wasn't just lost, she was exchanged, traded, or eliminated because of what she represented in dollars. The silence of law enforcement about this check is deafening. If it was legitimate, why not release that information? If it was unrelated, why not clear the air? By refusing to address it, investigators allowed the theory to grow stronger. And now, for many, the idea of money for a life feels more convincing than the idea of a child walking into the woods. In the end, whether the check was tied directly to Summer or not, it highlights a grim truth. Financial desperation changes everything. It creates motive. It explains risks. It makes unthinkable acts possible. And in the Summer Wells case, money appeared at the exact moment her life ended or was stolen. Coincidence? Maybe. But for a grieving public, that answer is no longer enough. And even if money played a role, it was not the only pressure crushing the family at that time. Another threat loomed in the background, one that may have been just as powerful as any payout. The Wells family was already under investigation by Child Protective Services. And that looming case, with the power to take away all the children, may have pushed them into actions that can no longer be excused as chance. When a child goes missing, investigators look not only at strangers, but also at the pressures inside the home. In the case of Summer Wells, one of the strongest and most overlooked pressures was the looming presence of Child Protective Services. Summer was not living in an ordinary household free from scrutiny. She was one of 4 children being raised in a family already under investigation. CPS had been involved before, and at the time of her disappearance, another hearing was just around the corner. That detail changes everything, because it means there was more at stake than a missing child. There was the risk of losing all the children. The Wells home was no secret. Visitors described it as messy, unsafe, cluttered, and chaotic. Broken furniture, unsecured hazards, and constant tension made it far from an ideal place to raise kids. CPS doesn't remove children for a few dirty dishes or a pile of laundry. It intervenes when there's a consistent pattern of neglect, abuse, or risk of harm. For the Wells family, those concerns were already documented. The upcoming CPS case meant the system was preparing to take serious action. Don and Candace knew that if the state decided against them, all 4 children, not just Summer, could be removed permanently. In that light, Summer becomes more than a child. She becomes a living piece of evidence, a child who could speak to investigators, even in simple words, about the reality inside her home. A child who bore the marks of neglect in her daily appearance, her clothing, and her environment. If CPS walked onto that property and interviewed Summer, what might she have said? What might she have revealed without even knowing it was dangerous to her parents? For a family already defensive, already fearful, this possibility could have been terrifying. Here is where motive begins to form. Faced with the threat of losing custody, some parents react with desperation. Instead of changing their lives, they look for ways to eliminate the risk. In this twisted logic, if the child most at risk is no longer present, then the case weakens. It sounds monstrous, and it is. But there are documented cases where parents harmed or even killed their own children to prevent social services from taking them away. It is one of the ugliest intersections of fear and selfishness. And in the Wells case, with CPS breathing down their necks, it becomes a possibility too dark to ignore. Now, combine this with the other motive we explored earlier: money. If Don truly did receive a $98,000 check, that provided not just financial relief, but also an alternative explanation for what happened to Summer. The overlap of money and CPS pressure creates a deadly equation. On one side, the chance to profit or protect themselves financially. On the other, the fear of losing every child to the state. Together, they create a scenario where Summer's disappearance could be rationalized, not as an accident or a stranger's crime, but as an intentional act to solve 2 problems at once. The signs line up with this theory. The frantic insistence that Summer was planting flowers before she vanished. The contradictions in Candace's statements. The awkward way Don spoke about her disappearance, focusing more on defending himself than on searching for his daughter. All of it feels less like panic over a sudden abduction and more like people struggling to hold together a story under pressure. When viewed through the CPS lens, the inconsistencies make sense. They weren't just covering for an accident. They may have been covering for a deliberate choice, one born of fear that the system was about to take control. There's also the question of timing. Why did Summer disappear just days before an important CPS court date? In the world of child welfare, timing matters. Cases are scheduled, hearings set, and deadlines approach. A disappearance right before such a hearing conveniently erases the possibility of Summer testifying or being observed by officials. Without her presence, the case loses one of its strongest witnesses. That timing cannot be ignored. For neighbors and community members, the CPS angle has always been a sore point. Many argue that the warning signs were obvious long before Summer vanished. If CPS had acted earlier, perhaps more aggressively, maybe Summer would never have been left vulnerable. Instead, the agency hovered, observed, and prepared to act, and in that waiting period, something irreversible happened. The tragedy of Summer's case is not just her disappearance, but the possibility that the very system meant to protect her created the pressure that led to her being silenced. Critics of CPS often point to systemic problems: too many cases, not enough workers, delayed responses. In Summer's situation, CPS may have underestimated the danger. They treated the case like many others, a troubled family under watch. But to the Wells family, CPS wasn't just a social worker at the door. It was a threat to their entire way of life. Losing custody would mean losing control, losing reputation, losing everything. When people feel cornered, they lash out. And tragically, the one who pays the price is often the child. It's important to say, there is no official confirmation that CPS was the direct reason Summer vanished. But the timing, the fear, and the behavior of the family all line up with this possibility. When combined with the financial angle, it creates a double motive too strong to ignore: protect themselves from losing all the children, and possibly benefit financially at the same time. In true crime investigations, motive is often what tips the balance. Evidence can be hidden, stories can be rehearsed, but motive has a way of seeping through. For the Wells family, CPS pressure was real, documented, and urgent. It hung over their heads like a storm cloud. Summer, innocent and unaware, may have been caught in the middle of that storm. And this leads us to the most pressing question of all: if these were the pressures, who actually carried out the act? Who made the decision? Who took the steps? Who silenced Summer? To answer that, we must look directly at the three central figures in her last hours: Candace, Dawn, and Candace. Only by examining their roles, their actions, and their contradictions can we begin to understand how a child under CPS protection became another name in the long, painful list of the missing. When trying to piece together the disappearance of Summer Wells, there is no avoiding the fact that three adults were closest to her in her final hours: her mother Candace Bly, her father Don Wells, and her grandmother, known as Candace. Each of them gave statements, each has appeared in interviews, and each one shows cracks that make the public wonder if the truth lies not in strangers or in the woods, but right inside the Wells family circle. Candace is at the center of suspicion. From the start, her words have not matched her actions. In interviews, she repeated a polished story about planting flowers with Summer before the little girl vanished. Yet this flower story never fit with the timeline built by others. Hunter described Summer's trouble at the swimming hole, the coughing, the choking. But Candace insisted that Summer was fine afterward. When pressed about the day, she contradicted herself on small but critical points. When they left the swimming hole, who was with them? Whether Summer walked back to the house or not? Investigators and the public quickly noticed these inconsistencies. In a missing child case, details matter, and changing details suggest someone trying to hold together a story rather than simply recalling events. Her demeanor adds another layer. In the milk jug video, Candace's voice does not carry concern. Instead of comfort or urgency, she comments about Summer's arm, almost as though checking a pose. Later, during media appearances, she seemed detached, flat, more defensive than devastated. People who followed the case saw in her not the anguish of a mother desperate for her child, but the coldness of someone hiding a heavier truth. Rumors of substance use add fuel to this perception. Many believe Candace may have been impaired that day, using alcohol, marijuana, or even harder banned substances, which could explain her lack of reaction and also give motive to conceal what happened, out of fear of CPS intervention. Then there is Don Wells. If Candace's inconsistencies suggest neglect and cover-up, Don's history suggests something darker. Don has faced accusations of sexual, not just in whispers, but from his own family members. His stepsisters have publicly claimed him. In interviews, Don often fixated on topics that made viewers uneasy, talking about predators, the dangers of the world, even bringing up his own troubled past in ways that sounded less like defense and more like excuses. Many saw this as an attempt to deflect attention away from his possible role. For Don, the motive could have been twofold. First, if he had abused Summer, he would have every reason to silence her before she grew old enough to speak openly. A child in a CPS investigation can reveal painful truths. Second, Don's obsession with protecting his reputation and keeping the family together created pressure. He was the public face after Summer's disappearance, calling in to TV shows, defending himself, and pointing fingers at others. But often, his behavior seemed less like grief and more like control, a man desperate to manage the story. And then comes Candace, the quieter figure in the background. At first glance, she appears less central, but her role is critical. She claimed she did not go to the swimming hole with Candace and Summer. Yet others insist she was there. Her timeline contains gaps. When exactly she went to the hospital, when she returned, and whether she was present during Summer's last moments. By saying, "I wasn't there," she distanced herself from responsibility. But if that is untrue, it creates serious suspicion. Was her statement meant to shield herself from blame? Or was she covering for Candace? Candace's position also matters because of proximity. She lived on the same property. She was in and out of the house that day. If something happened in the truck or in the yard, she likely knew or saw more than she admitted. And unlike Dawn, who often spoke too much, Candace remained mostly silent, letting contradictions swirl without ever clarifying them. In some ways, her silence is louder than Dawn's words. Taken together, the three form a troubling triangle of suspects. Each one had motive: Candace, afraid of losing custody or being exposed for neglect; Dawn, possibly guilty of abuse and desperate to keep it hidden; Candace, trying to protect her daughter and herself from the fallout. Each had opportunity. They were all present that day, close enough to act, close enough to cover up. And each has inconsistencies, shifting stories, defensive tones, or gaps in their timelines. This triangle is what makes the case so haunting. In many missing child stories, suspicion quickly moves outward to strangers, neighbors, or shadowy figures. Here, the spotlight never needed to move far. It stayed fixed on the people Summer trusted most. And yet, despite all this, the official investigation rarely pressed hard in their direction. Instead, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation emphasized the idea that Summer wandered off, a theory that many see as not only unlikely but also convenient for the family. Why would TBI lean on that explanation when the three closest adults raised so many red flags? Was it lack of evidence, poor investigation, or something deeper, a decision to avoid confronting the family because the truth was too tangled? Whatever the reason, the focus shifted away from the triangle of Candace, Dawn, and Candace, leaving the public with unanswered questions and growing suspicion. And that suspicion has not faded. To this day, online communities dissect Candace's interviews, Dawn's statements, and Candace's silence. They see a mother whose story changes, a father with a dark history, and a grandmother who avoids the spotlight. For many, the conclusion feels obvious. If you want to know what happened to Summer Wells, you do not need to search far into the mountains. You need only to look at the three adults who stood beside her on her final day. But here is the twist. Instead of facing the inconsistencies of this family triangle, the official narrative has continued to highlight another story: that Summer simply walked away from her home and was lost in the woods. A theory that ignores the fridge, the dogs, the trail cam, the missing tote, the scream, and above all, the contradictions of Candace, Dawn, and Candace. And so we are left with one final question. Why has the official line remained fixed on "wandered off" when so many threads point back inside the family itself? That is the puzzle we must confront in the final part. When Leslie Earhart of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation stepped in front of cameras and told the public there was the very real possibility that Summer wandered off, her words carried more weight than a casual remark. They were official, calculated, and repeated, but the phrasing struck many as strange. Why emphasize the very real possibility? Why not simply say, "It's possible"? The choice of words made it sound less like a theory and more like a shield, a line meant to hold the public's attention on the woods and away from everything else. From the beginning, the idea that Summer wandered off has been the easiest story to sell. It paints a picture the public can understand. A curious child leaves the yard, slips into the thick Tennessee hills, and vanishes. Search crews combed the land. Helicopters circled, dogs tracked for miles. Yet after days and weeks of searching, there was nothing. No torn clothing, no footprints, no scent trail, no body. For a 5-year-old to walk into wilderness and leave no trace is almost impossible. And the community knew it. That is why when Earhart's words were replayed across TV screens, people pushed back. Online forums, YouTube comments, even neighbors questioned the logic. Kids don't just vanish into thin air. One viewer wrote, "If she wandered off, we'd have found something by now." Others pointed out that if Summer had really walked away, she would not have gone far. The Wells property is rugged, yes, but she was barefoot. Within minutes, pain, thorns, or rocks would have slowed her. Search teams scoured every path within range. Nothing. For the public, the "wandered off" theory felt like an insult to common sense. So why insist on it? Why not pivot when the searches turned up empty? 3 possible reasons stand out. The first is lack of evidence. To charge someone, even a parent, police need more than suspicion. They need physical proof: blood, DNA, a body, a confession. Without that, prosecutors risk losing a case in court. By pushing the "wandered off" story, TBI could buy time, keeping public focus away from the family while they searched for stronger evidence. It's a strategic move investigators often make: hold to the simplest explanation until they have something solid. But in this case, the longer they repeated it, the more it felt like denial. The second reason may be embarrassment. If Summer died in the truck or near the house, then the first hours of the investigation, the hours spent sending hundreds of searchers into the woods, were misdirected. That would mean law enforcement wasted crucial time chasing a false trail. By sticking with "wandered off," they avoid admitting mistakes. It preserves the image of control, even if it sacrifices the truth. For an agency under public scrutiny, saving face can sometimes matter more than facing facts. The third and darkest possibility is protection. Was there someone the TBI did not want to confront? Was there pressure from above to keep suspicion away from the Wells family, or from someone connected to them? The $98,000 check, the unanswered questions about the tote, the fridge, the cadaver dog alerts, all these details point inward, not outward. Yet officially, the narrative kept pointing outward, into the hills. Some believe this was no accident. Whether protecting a botched investigation or protecting individuals with influence, the effect was the same. The public was told to look the other way. By now, most people who follow the case see the "wandered off" line as nothing more than a smokescreen. It is the easy answer when no real answers are offered. It is the phrase that allows investigators to step away from cameras without admitting failure. But it has also become the phrase that haunts this case because it feels dishonest. It feels like a cover thrown over a darker truth. That darker truth is what we have traced through these chapters. The milk jug picture that looks more like a photo of death than life. The missing tote that could have hidden a body. The scream that neighbors heard, ignored by officials. The old fridge in the yard, never explained. The cadaver dogs that pointed to evidence but were silenced in reports. The trail cam video that suggested movement in the woods. The $98,000 check that appeared when Summer vanished, and the looming CPS case that threatened to take all 4 children away. None of these fit with "wandered off." They fit with cover-up, with desperation, with motive. And so we arrive at the end of this story, but not the end of Summer's story. The official narrative may still cling to the idea of a child lost in the woods. But the public knows better. They have seen the cracks, the inconsistencies, the details too sharp to ignore. The smokescreen of "wandered off" may have worked for a while, but smoke always clears. And when it does, what is left are the unanswered questions, the hidden evidence, and the heavy truth that justice has not yet been served. Summer Moon Utah Wells did not simply wander off. Something happened to her that day, something deliberate, something concealed. And until investigators face that truth, the case will remain unsolved, and suspicion will remain heavy on the 3 people who were supposed to protect her. The call now is simple: to pull back the smokescreen, to re-examine the evidence, to admit mistakes if they were made, and to bring forward whatever truth has been buried. For Summer, there is no second chance, no way back. But for the world that has followed her story, there is still one thing left to fight for: justice for Summer Moon Utah Wells.